Hello, everyone, and welcome from sunny Napa Valley. My name is Christian Ogenfuss. I'm one of the founders of Napa Valley Wine Academy, and I'm really excited to welcome you to this study hall. Today we have one of our instructors and partners in Napa Valley Wine Academy, Peter Marks, with us. Hello, Peter. How are you?
Hey, Christian, I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to having your presentation today on Alsatian wines.
I am too. I mean, it may be sunny in Napa Valley, but I bet my bottom dollar it's probably sunny in Alsace right now too.
I bet, yeah.
Well, great. Shall we go ahead and get started?
Let's do it.
Okay. Well, if you want to share that presentation, we will. Is it up there already? Okay, good. So as you can see, in this picture, it's a little cloudy, but Alsace is one of the most picturesque, most idyllic regions, not just in France, in my humble opinion, but in the entire world. I have a predilection for Alsatian wines. I love them. I'm going to share some of my passion and a little bit of knowledge about Alsace in the short time we have together. Also, at the end, I've got 4 wines I'm going to taste, 2 Rieslings and 2 Gewürztraminers, sort of the iconic classic varieties that you find here. But, I have to say, Alsace is one of the best regions in France to grow grapes. I remember when I first got into wine, one of my favorite wines that kind of got me hooked was Gewürztraminer. And I drank Gewürztraminers all over the world, from Italy, from obviously Alsace, even Louis Martini's Gewürztraminer from Napa Valley, which unfortunately they don't make anymore. But because of that, I was always anxious and really looking forward to visiting Alsace, which I finally did in 1984. And, some people yearn to go to Burgundy, or some people yearn to go to Piedmonte or Champagne. I wanted to go to Alsace. And when I got there, I was still blown away. I mean, all my expectations were exceeded. And one of the main things about what makes Alsace such a great place is that it is in the rain shadow of the Vosges Mountains. And that catches a lot of the rain from the western storms, making Alsace not only one of the sunniest and driest places in France, it's actually, except for certain parts of the south of France, it's the second sunniest place in all of France, which is really hard to believe if you're thinking about, Alsace being in this northern climate. But thanks to the Vosges Mountains, grape growing takes place throughout the summer and into the autumn with very little, if any, rain. And, this picture says 1,000 words. This is what I always imagined Alsace would look like, and this is what it looks like. The cobblestone streets, the little planter boxes with the flowers. When I first went there, quiche Lorraine was all the thing to eat, and, it's a very popular dish, and I fell in love with Alsace wines, and of course, quiche Lorraine, which I still like today, by the way. But it's just, when you get there, the people are hospitable. The wines are very forward and friendly and generous, and the people and the food is as well. And again, just to reiterate how ideal these growing conditions are, it's an exceptional climate thanks to those Vosges Mountains. And this allows the grapes to ripen slowly and over a long period of time to get ideal ripeness. As we'll talk about, some of the best vineyards are up on the slopes, and some of the best wines, the so-called Grand Cru wines, come from the slopes. These slopes tend to be at about 600 to 750 feet. And it's also found that as you get further down to the flatter plains, that's where the wines that simply have an appellation of Alsace on the label would more likely come from. The other thing is all these vineyards, they basically face southeast and east, which is an ideal exposition, and not unlike Burgundy, which is not too far away, which gives you those perfectly ripened grapes. So a little overview, 90% of the wine produced here is white, and it is varietally driven, as you will notice in one of the few appellation or AOC or AOP wines in France that actually puts the name of the grape variety on the label. And I mean, who doesn't love that? And by law, the wines must be bottled in these very tall flute bottles. Today, there are over 4,000 grape growers and about 20 negotiants and co-ops. And those negotiants and co-ops represent about 60% of the population. The other interesting thing about Alsace is if you look back in history, I mean, it's gone back and forth between being part of France and being part of Germany. It's gone back and forth. And many, many years ago, there was a woman who was interviewed on TV. She was from Alsace. And she was born during the Franco-Prussian War, born as a citizen of France. And then World War I came and she was a citizen of Germany. And then it reverted back to France. And then after World War II, or during World War II, she became a citizen of Germany again. And then after World War II, became a citizen of France. And the interviewer on TV asked her, so, you consider yourself a person of French or German, heritage? She goes, I'm Alsatian. I mean, that's how proud these people are. They don't take any country. They're their own people, and the wines are very unique as well. I've mentioned this in this picture. You see these hillsides, which are so critical to the growing of grapes. Hillsides in Alsace were started to be replanted in 1960s, and that really helped. Since that time, has really helped to grow the quality of the wines. In addition, the other big change, which has taken place more recently, is that the new generation is coming in, just like many parts of the world. And the new generation is not just growing grapes and making wine as a job or occupation. They're taking things much more seriously, and they're producing wines of incredible quality and distinctive terroir. If we look at the types of varieties, and these are the main varieties, you can see Riesling is in the lead with about 22, 23%, followed shortly by Pinot Blanc. You don't see a lot of Pinot Blanc varietally labeled, but a lot of that goes into Cremant, which we'll talk about in a moment, the sparkling wine. Then we have Gewürztraminer, Pinot Gris. A little over 10% of the vines are planted to Pinot Noir, and then some Sylvaner. And so here are the different characteristics of the grapes, and you can read that for yourself. But Riesling is the king in Alsace because it is very cold hardy, and in fact, I was there once in the winter, and it was snowy and cold. So you need to have a type of wine that will withstand those cold temperatures. Also, as you know, Riesling has great acidity, which gives these wines longevity. And I believe, German Rieslings can age beautifully, but so can Alsatian wines from the Riesling grape. Again, my favorite, Gewürztraminer. This is a fairly early budding variety, so it can have some risk of frost in the spring. It's also a little bit vigorous, so you have to tame the yields. And when it's picked ripe and full, it is just one of those hedonistic, over-the-top, aromatic grape varieties. It doesn't necessarily age well because of its lowish acidity, and it can be made in a range of styles from dry to sweet. Pinot Gris, also another noble variety. And I should mention, these noble varieties are noble in the sense that they are the 4 varieties that are eligible to be labeled as a Grand Cru, with a couple exceptions. These are the only 4 grapes that can be labeled as Grand Cru. And these are also the 4 grapes that can be labeled as Selection de Grand Noble or Vendange Tardive. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit as well. But Pinot Gris does make a really classic wine, a little bit more acidity than Gewürz, and can age extremely well. Today, a lot of the styles are being made much drier than they have been in the past. And then a grape that only is planted about 5% or so is Muscat. And here it's the Muscat Petit Grand variety, which is the best of the Muscat. There's a number of Muscats. Some Muscat Hautenel, which is a lesser variety, doesn't have as much aromatic complexity and liveliness. But these wines can be a beautiful accompaniment to spicy cuisine. A lot of people say, oh, drink Gewürztraminer with Tex-Mex or Asian. But I actually like Muscat as one of my favorites for that types of food. And then here, just a mention of the other varieties. Again, Pinot Noir is the only black grape allowed in Alsace. And especially in the more recent years, as global warming is taking place, there's some amazing Pinot Noirs. If you find any on the market from 2015, that was one of the first vintages where they really started to show themselves as a classic region for growing great quality Pinot Noir. Pinot Blanc and Auxerrois are 2 varieties which are basically the same, or at least they can be labeled as the same. It doesn't matter which one you have, but you can label it as Pinot Blanc or Auxerrois. And it is a grape that is used commonly as a base for the sparkling wines Cremant d'Alsace. And then finally, don't forget about Sylvaner. This is a variety that does need a particular site to produce great wine, and usually older vines on hillsides is the best. It is a variety that can be used in a particular, one of the Grand Crus does allow Sylvaner, so it's an exception to that rule that only 5 varieties can be used. And it can often provide a really great value at a very good quality. I thought I'd mention a little bit about viticulture. The vines here are generally, especially on the plain, are planted and trained very high. And this is to help reduce the risk of frost damage and also to reduce humidity. The plantings in Alsace are about half as dense as they are in Burgundy due to that higher training. They're probably about 4,500 to about 4,800 vines per hectare. And those vines are obviously in this picture planted on hillsides. If you are on hillsides, you must pick by hand. Also, by law, if you're a Grand Cru, you must pick by hand. I should mention the fact that a lot of these growers are now going organic. 15% of the vineyards are organic in Alsace, which if you compare that with all of France is averaging about 10%. So they're way above the curve there. And again, given these wonderful dry conditions you have during the growing season, it's prime for producing grapes in the organic viticulture method. And again, long hang time due to the dry weather does allow for a range of styles. And then winemaking, the goal with wines from Alsace is to maintain that fruit character. I mean, that's why we put a single label on the bottle. And this is something that is very important to maintain by not using any new oak or anything that will obscure that. In fact, you can see some of those so-called foeders in the top right-hand picture. If they're using those foeders for the very first time, they will generally put in lesser grapes like Sylvaner or something, or Pinot Blanc, because those are the grapes that are not going to, and they'll make Edelsviker from that, as opposed to making a classic wine. But Edelsviker, by the way, means noble mixture, and it's similar to another description you might see called gentile. And those two classifications are generally a mix of different varieties, a so-called kitchen sink, if you will. Some people might do a little skin contact to give a little extra flavor, especially with those aromatic varieties like Muscat and Gewürztraminer. And temperature-wise, generally you ferment at a little bit warmer temperature for Gewürztraminer and Pinot Gris. That's because those grapes can have a little bit higher sugar at harvest. And if you want to make a dry wine, you need to have that temperature a little bit warmer to ensure that the fermentation will go to completeness. Other grapes like Muscat and Riesling, you can ferment them a little bit cooler because technically you don't get as high sugar levels in the grapes when they're harvested. Lees aging can take place in these large containers, which add a little creaminess and texture to the wines, but they're not stirred very much because you want to, again, maintain the freshness in the wines. So here are some of the appellation designations you can find on the label. Obviously, Alsace AOC, which is the broad appellation, comes from anywhere within the region, but you can find the name Grand Cru. Now, Grand Cru is a appellation status that was instituted in the 1980s. Today, there's about 51 of them, and they are becoming more and more important, I think, again, because a lot of growers and producers are putting more attention to the vineyards and really trying to draw the best quality out of their grapes. When it was first introduced, there was a lot of controversy about Grand Cru. Some people felt the best sites weren't all selected and the yields were too high, but I think people are really now recognizing that Grand Cru does mean something and it will produce a higher quality wine. Again, as I just mentioned a little while ago, there are two other designations you can have on your label. Vendange tardive, which translates as late picked. These are grapes that are picked a little bit later than normal, and there's a minimum amount of sugar they must have in the grapes to be classified as such. Also, Gewürztraminer and Pinot Gris, which tend to have a little bit higher sugar, naturally will have higher minimum requirements for Vendange tardive than would Riesling and Muscat. Sometimes with these Vendange tardives, when you ferment them dry, they are dry, but sometimes it might have just a kiss of sweetness because the sugar is so high that all that sugar cannot be converted into alcohol. On the other hand, if you have a selection de Grand Noble, sometimes abbreviated SGN, those are grapes that are infected with botrytis, and those will always be sweet. These are comparable to a Beerenauslese or Trocken Beerenauslese from Germany. So these, again, to be called a Vendange tardive or selection Grand Noble, it must be made from either Riesling, Gewürztraminer, Pinot Gris, or Muscat. And this is the pyramid of the hierarchy of wines in Alsace. And again, looking at the percent of Grand Cru, it's only 5%. And 95% of the wines are so-called regional wines. One of the things that you can have besides just Alsace AOP or AOC, you can have a complementary denomination. There are 13 so-called communes that can be listed along with the name Alsace. And you could also have the name of a Le Douai or a vineyard name on the label. So those are some options that are possible. And then finally, I just put out the mention of Cremant Alsace because this now represents 24% of the production in Alsace, which if you think about it, that's a lot of wine. There is definitely less still wine today due to the popularity of sparkling wine. And from Alsace, you can get some really wonderful, affordable Cremants. These are wines made in the traditional method. There's a popular one that's on the market that's a rosé Cremant Alsace, which I think it costs about $18 a bottle. And I'd probably drink a couple bottles a month of that. It's so good. Now, this might be a little hard for you to see, but this map is of Alsace, and it's pointing out all those names, and the little red dots are all the Grand Crus. And again, there's 51 of them. They're hard to see, but you'll notice in the southern part of Alsace in this map, tends to be a little bit higher percentage of Grand Crus than there are in the north. And if you can divide Alsace into two. The southern part is known as the Haut Rhine, H-A-U-T, meaning higher Rhine. And the northern part is known as the Bas, B-A-S, Rhine, or lower Rhine. And what that means is higher Rhine, or Haut Rhine, which is the southern part, is higher upriver. Here, the Rhine River, which you can see directly to the east of these vineyards, which is that blue line separating France and Germany, that river runs from south to north. So it's going upward, or it's going up on the map. So the higher it goes up, it's called the Bas Rhine because it's lower, farther down the Rhine River. Now, the mountains on the southern part of the Haut Rhine tend to be a little bit higher, and that's why you see more Grand Crus here. The higher elevation is giving more of a rain shadow effect and producing better quality wines. And that rainfall, by the way, averages about 25 inches per year. And kind of what we see here in Napa, just to give you an idea how dry it is. And again, or very little, if any, rain during the growing season and during harvest time. I just put this up here because, there's a good possibility that there may be further classification, as a lot of folks are discussing the idea of producing Premier Cru wines. And when they first started the Grand Cru system, part of the controversy was that you went from appellation Alsace to Grand Cru and nothing in between. And the fact is, there are some sites that are really good that fall into just the village level wines. So these are wines that could be, or AOC, just Alsace. So these are some possible hierarchy that you might see in the future, just like you do in Burgundy with regional wines labeled as here Alsace, village wines with the name of the village, Premier Cru with the name of the vineyard, and then of course the Grand Cru vineyard wines. So we'll see. This is an exciting thing, and I think we'll hopefully find some agreement on this in the near future. But it takes a while for everybody to come to the table and agree on anything these days. So I'm not sure it's going to happen tomorrow. Now, maybe I'll just pause and ask Christian if there are any questions, because I'm going to pour the first two wines that I'm going to taste, and I'll put those up here on the screen.
No questions so far, but feel free if you have any questions to put those in the comment section here. I did ask some people to talk a little bit about what are their favorite wines. We have votes for and against Gewürztraminer, Pinot Gris, Pinot Blanc, and then sparkling wines. So for what it's worth,
you can there's something for everybody. If you go to Bordeaux, if you don't like Cabernet Merlot, you're out of luck. Or if you don't like Pinot Noir or Chardonnay, I don't know who that is, but if you're in Burgundy, you don't have a lot of choice. But in Alsace, the world's your oyster. Now, I'm going to taste these first two wines you can see here. The 2016 Hugel Riesling, a classic Riesling, which is a wine that comes from throughout the Alsace region. And then Meyer Fahn, a Grand Cru Käferkopf Riesling 2017. So to begin with, I've got the Riesling from Hugel. And, you know, this family has been around since 1639. Even though it's a negotiant house, it has been one of the most popular and also, I think, one of the best quality producers in all the region. And this is a 2016, and when I smell it, the first thing I get is freshness. I mean, it's beautifully fresh. I don't pick up any age. There's not any petrol character, at least not very much at all. And it's got a wonderful sense of apple spice, some floral notes like honeysuckle, maybe, honeysuckle, maybe a little bit of lime zest, actually a lot of lime zest now I'm smelling, and some minerality as well. Oh, wow. I better get a napkin because I think I'm going to start salivating. I have to put that, there's a lot of moisture in my mouth right now. That is a very high acid wine. It's zingy. It's so fresh. I mean, this is a wine that has wonderful counterbalance acidity to that beautiful ripe fruit character. And I have to say, this wine doesn't seem like it's 4 years old. I would say this wine is like 1 or 2 years old based on the color, the freshness of the flavors. This is a wine, even though it's a moderately priced Alsatian Riesling, I think this wine can easily go 5 or 10 years. Riesling with that great acidity is going to give this wine a longevity that I think would surprise a lot of people. Okay, so the next wine is the Meyer Flan again, and this is the 2017. So this is a Grand Cru called Kupferkopf. The vine, I looked it up. The vines for this particular producer were planted in 1978, so they've got a little bit of age by now. And it's particularly when you get up on the slopes, there's a lot of sandstone and granite that really limits the yields, producing more concentration in the grapes. This wine, compared to the Hugel, this wine has just a little bit more ripe, not a little bit, quite a bit more ripeness. So where I got some maybe apple spice or green apple in the Hugel, to me, this is more of a ripe apple. I'm also getting some peach, some fresh blossom. And there's a haunting sort of minerality here too. I can't really put my finger on it, but there's part of it's wet stone, part of it's like dark earth. Have you ever gone on, it kind of reminds me, if you ever go to a creek in the summer and maybe there's like a granite cliff that you jump off or slide into the creek, it kind of smells like that wet granite. That's what it smells like. Wow. Much fuller body, richer. I don't know if the alcohol is that much higher. It doesn't seem higher, but it just seems creamier. I think the alcohol is only 13.5, and the Hugel, should have looked this up earlier, that's 12%, so it does have a little bit more alcohol. But to me, there's a richer, more complex mouthfeel. I'm pretty sure they did some lees aging on this to give it some of that richer texture and beautiful creaminess. And then the finish, really, 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 really long. I'm tasting that one, and the acidity is creating a lot of moisture in my mouth. Again, this wine could easily go 15, 20 years, I believe. This is an exceptionally balanced wine, concentration, complexity, great acidity to give it that time in the bottle. And I think it'll get more complex, especially a lot of these Rieslings will develop that petrol-y note that can be really interesting. All right, so let me do a quick pour on the next two wines, which I've been waiting for because this is the grape that got me in the wine business, Gewürztraminer. This is if I wasn't drinking Gewürztraminer back in the 1970s, I wouldn't be here today. And this is these are the two wines I'm tasting. So again, Meyer Flan, that we just tasted their Gewürztraminer, but now we are tasting we tasted the Riesling, now we're tasting the Gewürztraminer. And then, believe it or not, a 2001 from this Sabans Butcher, which is a producer that does things biodynamically, by the way. And Herig de Turckheim is a so-called Le Douai. It's not a Grand Cru. As you notice, it doesn't say Grand Cru in the label. But this is one of those Le Douais or names of vineyard for this producer. In fact, I think Zindhumbruck makes Herig de Turckheim either Riesling or Gewürz as well. Now, I pick up my Meyer Flan first to give that a little smell. Ooh, don't need to go very much with the swirling. This is intense. In fact, wow, I don't think I've ever had a wine that actually smells like pumpkin pie. I mean, this really smells, and that's what, the Gewürz or the spice in Gewürztraminer is, that nutmeg, allspice, clove, cinnamon, but this wine has it in droves. I don't pick up a lot of that so-called lychee nut, the traditional sort of tropical fruit people associate with Gewürz. There's a little bit there. There's some pineapple, there's some grapefruit as well, but it's really spicy, and it's got a lot of rose petal as well. Beautiful. Ooh, that, I don't think this is sweet, but there's so much ripeness in the fruit, and it almost mimics some sweetness, but the wine is dry, bone dry. Again, this is a lowish type of acid on the Gewürztraminer, but this one is probably like medium minus. I don't think it's out of balance because there's still some good freshness there, and the vibrancy of that wine as well. I'm actually gonna pour myself a little more because I want to show you the color difference between this wine and the next wine. And I'll hold this up to the camera, so hopefully you can see it. So here's the Meyer Fawn, and there is the 2001. Can you see that? Am I holding that up in the right spot? There we go. Can you tell which one is older? I think you can. All right, so this is the 2001, and I have to thank my brother-in-law, who has an extensive cellar of older German wines and Alsatian wines, and he came by a couple of weeks ago and dropped off like 5 cases of wine, and I've been going through them. And in fact, there was a Zinhumbrecht Riesling Grand Cru that I was going to open and do for this webinar, but when I opened it up to test it the other day, or actually, excuse me, I put my Corvin in. I've never had a Corvin that started shooting bubbles out like it was like shaving cream coming out of a can. And then I opened the bottle with the cork, and the wine had started to re-ferment. So I think there was some residual sugar. It was a 2002 Grand Cru Riesling, and it unfortunately had not been stored. Well, maybe it just wasn't filtered, so there was still some yeast in there that converted the sugar into some alcohol. So it was a little bit of a slightly cremanti, or I should say spritzy wine, which didn't taste all that great either. So I picked this one instead. And, people say Gewürz doesn't age, but, if you like caramel, if you like hazelnuts, if you like marmalade jam, orange marmalade jam, I also get that spice. There's some roses again, but maybe more of a dried rose petal. This wine has it. Let's see how this one tastes. Ooh. Dry, but really creamy in the mouth. It says, you see on the label, it has 14% alcohol. So that alcohol is giving it some richness and body and some viscosity. This one, I should mention the Gewürz from Meyer Fawn, and this one does have a slight viscous character, which is very common in Alsace, where you get these grapes quite ripe, and there's an oily texture that can be common with wines from here. But this wine, I like it. I think I have some aged Gouda in my refrigerator. I'm going to pull that out tonight and maybe enjoy this wine. I think this nuttiness and the creaminess of this wine with the nuttiness and the creaminess of the Gouda would be a match made in heaven. And some folks may find this a little bit too much over the hill, but I think it's still an interesting and beautiful wine to drink. So those are my wines for today. And I don't know if anybody has been to Alsace before, but again, picture can do about 1,000 words, but 10,000 memories will be had if you go and visit. It is unbelievably gorgeous, and it is, to me, the place where you can find people who enjoy life, enjoy food, and of course, enjoy making and drinking great wines.
Yeah, that is a beautiful picture that captures really the beauty of Alsace and its majesty. Not only its wines, but its food and culture are just fantastic as well.
Indeed.
I'm sure many a fairy tale were inspired by the architecture there.
Right.
Well, what a great presentation, Peter. Thank you so much for sharing those special wines. At least, we would have loved to have been able to reach through the screen and pour them into your glass. But thank you for sharing your thoughts on those. If you enjoy our study halls and our Monday trivia sessions, please let us know. Tell your friends about our study halls every Wednesday, 2 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time, as well as our Monday trivia, which is also at 2 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time. But Peter, you're going to be interviewing a special guest coming up here on one of these Wednesdays. You want to let us know about that?
Yes, actually, yeah, we just confirmed that today. So 2 weeks from today, the 19th, we're going to have Lisa Perotti Brown, Master Wine, who some of you may know. She's the editor of the Wine Advocate. So we'll be talking to her about, how she got in the wine business, what is it like reviewing 100, 200 wines a day, and she's a great friend as well, and I think we'll have a good time. So I hope you can join us in 2 weeks from today.
Great. Well, I'm looking forward to that myself. So, well, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Peter, for your time today. Everyone stay safe out there, drink well, and hopefully Peter's inspired you to go out and try some wines from Alsace. Till next time. Cheers.